Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pro Camera Reviews, the weekly show done by the staff of the Fablographer, specifically the review staff. My name is Chris Gambit. I'm the editor-in-chief and founder of the Fablographer, and this show is done by me and Paul Ip, reviews editor.
Hey, folks. How's it going?
And also our gear editor, Brett Day.
Hi, everyone.
So, first off, just to show you guys a little bit more of an interesting perspective. On previous shows, on one specifically, I've used the Canon EOS R that was last week, and I had very high quality imagery with a little bit of lag. And this week, Paul's using the XT4 with the 1680, right?
Yeah, 1680 f40 IS.
Yeah, and we're purposely doing this as part of our tests because, you know, a bunch of camera companies have been like, yeah, we're going to try to create like these webcam features. Specifically, Paul's doing it on a PC though, correct?
Yep, I am using on an Asus StudioBook that I'm currently reviewing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last week I was on my gaming PC, and right now I'm back on my iMac. Brett is joining me in the cult of Steve Jobs as well too. So Paul's the only outlier. He is not part of the cult of
I have
Steve
my iPhone
Jobs.
right here.
Yeah, sure. I don't know, man. I won't be able to fully acknowledge you until you get an iMac.
That's fine. I hear from you enough as is. So.
Yeah, I know. I know. You're right. So we've got a pretty great show for you today. We're talking a lot about ethics in some ways or another. One segment that we're doing that I'm personally taking the lead on is about high-speed sync flash. And the reason why I'm really talking about this is because I think that it's a method that really puts a photographer in control for making images and making sure that they come out the way they really should in camera versus trying to get them to look that way in post. And we're talking a little bit there about like post-production versus like actual photography. And, you know, I've been in some conversations before where people are like, oh, well, I didn't realize, you know, you actually had to know how to shoot to be a photographer. I figured I'd just do everything in Photoshop. I hear one of you laughing. Of course, this has been
That was me.
I figured. We've been in the same conversations, yeah. But on a more serious note, we're also talking about the issue of RAW versus JPEGs. And the reason why I'm also saying why this is a very serious note is because of the fact that, you know, there have been a lot of people saying for many years in this industry that, you know, you should always shoot RAW. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But there are great reasons for JPEGs. And Brett's going to be taking the lead on that one. And then Paul will be taking the lead on the probably biggest issue here. And it's more about ethics in street photography, what's legal versus what's ethical. Paul and I actually, we just got back from shooting some protests here in New York. And I'd say that there were a lot of other people shooting, right, Paul?
That was a fair amount.
Yeah. We're going to be talking a little bit about a couple other issues. Like one is documentary porn and, you know, other ethical issues like that. So let's get started. Brett, why don't you choose the first segment? Who's going to be the first victim?
Let's learn about high-speed sync flash.
Yay. Okay. So let me tell you guys a little bit about high-speed sync flash. So first off, what is it? High-speed sync flash is a flash method that lets you override the normal flash sync speed of your camera. So to begin with, if you have a DSLR or if you have a mirrorless camera or something like that, the standard flash sync speed is 1/250th. That means you can't go over 1/250th of a second. But in high-speed sync mode, you can go all the way up to 1/8000th if you wanted to. And the way that that works is a flash will just go like, boom, like that. But in high-speed sync mode, it'll go boom, 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 boom. Oh, that looks really cool. Like this on my screen. But yeah. But that result of that making look really cool also gives you the ability to do things like a method that's called overpowering the sun. And to do that, I'm going to bring up a couple of images that I prepared earlier on. Come on, share my screen. Okay, doing that right now. So, and come on, I believe in you. Okay, cool. Can you guys see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see the guy there, and then you could see this photo, and that photo, and all that.
No, looks like you only have them selected. I don't think you started the slideshow yet.
Okay, then. In that case, let me stop the share very quickly. I apologize about that one, guys. And I'm going to do this. And now what I will do is I will go back to Zoom. And I will say share screen. And now I will say this one. So now, can you see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I apologize for that. Thanks for catching me on that, folks. So this image is a result of high-speed sync. And why is this high-speed sync? First off, you might think that, hey, you know, that looks kind of normal. But it's not really normal. The way that the image would normally be exposed, if I were exposing for his face, because it's so bright outside, the entire background would be completely blown out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. So high-speed sync will, first off, when you use a flash, shutter speeds control the ambient light, which is obviously everything behind there. Your apertures and your aperture controls more of the flash output, or directly corresponds to it, and so does your ISO in some way or another. So I'm going to take you through a couple others. This is my old roommate from many years ago, and this shot wouldn't have been possible without high-speed sync. Same with this. This was, I think it was last year. Yeah, last year during the polar bear plunge, January 1st. You know, it was really bright and sunny. It was super cold out here in New York. And I just decided I'd go around and I'd shoot people on the beach with the GFX 50R and a Profoto B10, I believe. Yes. And again, this shot wouldn't really be possible because I would have to expose her and it would completely blow out the background. Here's another great example of that. You see the sun on the right-hand side? Otherwise, this image would have been completely blown out. Another great example. And again, this is a trick that some people sometimes call overpowering the sun. And there's another method that you can do, which is basically just using an ND filter. But then that means you have to conversely really raise the power of your flash because you're cutting the overall light sensitivity of the image. Here's another great one to show you, like, the reason why you'd use high-speed sync. Yet another one, you know, you see the sun in the background? Like, if I were just exposing for his face, there's no way you'd see anything in the background there. It'd be pretty much impossible to do.
Yeah, sun's almost serving as a rim light.
Yeah, pretty much. And you totally see that here on his back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his hands and his back and his head.
Exactly. Here's another one that I did a couple years ago, and this is really a great example of it because it's in the snow. And in the snow, like, everything's white, all the light is what we're reflecting off of everything else, and you sort of see that there, but otherwise she's being hit directly from the light that's in front of her, and you can tell that by the shadow right here. But it still looks pretty natural. Same here. This is a controlled situation. In terms of it being outside, but I put the light in a giant umbrella and just basically used it, overpowered some of the ambient light. This was on a summer day, obviously, as you can tell from his attire. I was just able to overpower it and make it look like something like, I don't know, maybe around dusk. Yeah. Here's another one. Again, I have a little bit more control over the situation here because we're using shadows of a nearby building. And here's another one. This one I shot on a Sony press trip years ago. Actually, I think it was Kando. I forgot. But anyway, this was out in the open in the desert. It was a little bit before sunset, and I decided that I would use a Profoto light, a 55mm f1.8 on a camera, and I would just overpower all the ambient light. And that's how I was able to get this look. Otherwise, completely in the desert, there's no way you're getting this look. Like, it's impossible. At least getting it in camera. You can get it with a lot of post-production, but otherwise, no. And I mean, I'll stop that recording right there. You guys can see me now, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I guess a part of this, you know, it's a smaller ethical issue, but, like, I've always thought that you know, for you to really be a photographer, and you know, this is us just really talking. I would think at least 75% or 80% of the photo needs to be done originally in camera, and then the rest can be done in post production. Like that can require retouching, or like getting rid of a couple of other elements. Cropping I don't really count because that's not really changing like the fundamental dynamics of the image. But I mean, that's just me. If you take an image and you edit it a lot and it becomes something completely different than what it looked like in camera, then I feel like most of your work is being done later on as a post production artist. And I've seen a lot of post production artists do this who are fantastic and they're wonderful Photoshop artists, but I don't necessarily think they're photographers. I'd love to hear from you guys about this. Paul, we've talked about this a little bit before, and we'll get to you about that. But Brett, what do you think about that?
I mean, if you're talking about someone who uses Photoshop a lot, I would still consider them photographers in the fact that they're going out with a camera and they're creating their scene. They're composing their image and capturing the initial image in camera. But there's certainly nothing wrong with a photographer going into Photoshop and adding or removing elements after the fact, as long as they're upfront about it. That's the only issue I generally have with that. Is a lot of people will try to pass off images they have created in Photoshop as an original image. And I think there needs to be a bit more upfront information about what's been done in post from photographers.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. I mean, there are large retouching issues with that. And I mean, I've seen certain YouTubers be like, hey, I don't remember how wonderful the sunset was, but this photo reminded me of it. And then someone was just like, wait a second, isn't the sunset filter effect from Luminar? And then he was like, yeah, actually it is. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in some ways, Brett, but I feel like if an image is one way and you know you're really just relying on Photoshop and Lightroom as like a major crutch to completely develop it into something else, then you're more of a photo editor because most of that work was done in post versus being done in camera. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fair point.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think about that?
I'm of two minds in some respects. So I wholeheartedly agree that you should always try to get as much as you can in camera. And, but as so certain elements of my work, not for the site, obviously. So just for those joining us tonight, any images that you see as part of any things that we review for the photographer, we do not retouch, and we make it a point to let you guys know because we want you to judge the images as they are. If we're retouching everything out, we're presenting the best possible scenario, and for someone that were to go and purchase the same product later on, they're gonna wonder, oh, how come I can't achieve this like the same result? Like, how come I'm running into all these issues? So on that respect, we don't retouch anything because we want to, because the whole point of those images is to show you what the camera or the lens are capable of. With that said, some elements of my work, so I shoot a lot of commercial and lifestyle editorial for companies, for private clients, or I'll shoot beauty work for makeup artists and cosmetics brands. That's where there's definitely a bit of retouching involved there. As an industry, the industry as a whole though has scaled back and starting to embrace the naturalness of the subjects. So that's good because that's less work that I have to do, and I don't always have to send things out to a retoucher when I don't have enough time to work on the images. But I think the biggest issue is with individuals that are like what Chris just described, is you're shooting one image and then you're spending a disproportionate amount of time in post trying to fix mistakes that you could have addressed in camera had you you have the proper knowledge of how to use a camera and how to manipulate and utilize lighting. Now, this includes ambient lighting, or aka natural light, as well as artificial lighting. So you would have constant lights or strobes. Strobes is usually what most photographers use. And I think that to be a complete photographer, as a professional, as a working professional, you really need to learn and master lighting. Uh, just, the word photography itself is to paint with light. That's the root of the word. That's where it comes from. So I think it's paramount that we know how to do all these things. There are certain elements that, obviously you could do in post. Let's say you want to get rid of some flyaway hairs, or there might have been some blemish that you want to remove, or there's a distracting element that's in the background that you might have missed and you want to retouch out. As depending on your use case, and this kind of segues into what we're going to be talking about with ethics later on. As long as it doesn't change the intent of the photo, it's usually generally okay for you to retouch them out, but just be upfront, because if in certain scenarios, retouching and altering an image has effects. It creates certain effects that you may not think about while you work on the image. So going back to photographing people, for example, one of the biggest issues in the fashion and the beauty industry is body dysmorphia. For a long time, you have magazines and companies putting out campaigns where you have images of people, generally women. They have been retouched to the point that they don't look human. The proportions are just humanly impossible. They're not right. And so the end effect is you have an entire generation of people looking at these images thinking that that's the norm, and it sets unrealistic standards.
More than that as well too, and I'm sorry to
so
interrupt.
that's one problem. And another problem is you have people that create, and they're doing beautiful work, right? They're creating composites and they look phenomenal. They're works of art, but I'm hesitant to call some of them photographs, because these are images that are intentionally manipulated digitally. You have artists that like Peter Lick. That's an example. Like if you're not familiar with his work, you can look it up. Like I think I think part of his popularity is he claims that all the photos are real, but some of those photos do not obey the laws of physics. It's just not possible. So that's where the problem lies, is when you're intentionally deceiving your audience about how the photo was created. Now, obviously, we may sound like sticklers because, we have a huge background in trying to educate. We want our audience to learn, right? To become better photographers, obviously. So, these are skills that are core to that. And that's not to take away from the tremendously amazing work that some of these composite artists are doing. And whether or not I can call them photographers depends on whether or not they're shooting their own plates. So, because there are photographers that do phenomenal work, but their work is very obviously been manipulated digitally. But if they're shooting their own background plates and the foreground, the subject, if all the elements in the image were created by them, okay, sure. It's a photo manipulation. Like that would be the most accurate way to describe it. But they're also photographers in the sense that they created all those different assets used in creating a piece of work. You have people like Brooke Shaden or Renee Robin. They do phenomenally gorgeous work, and they shoot all their own background plates. But then you have people that they'll go out and shoot a landscape. The background's completely blown out because they don't know what they're doing, and then they go into Photoshop where they use a plugin, and they put they'll replace the sky and this. So you have everything that's front lit, and then the sun is facing you. So and then and then they wonder why the image doesn't look right because it's like what's being depicted doesn't obey the laws of physics.
Oh, really
So,
quickly, just to add on to what you're saying, and also to address a question that Sanjay actually had. The reason why that label is so important, and this adds to what Paul is saying, is because of the fact that there is active marketing out there from like Adobe and a couple other companies that say that you didn't know that all you needed was Adobe Lightroom to be a photographer. And there have been full-on campaigns saying, hey, this is a product that allows graphic designers to create photos without paying the photographer that super large price. And in some ways, because of that type of marketing, there have been people creating these photo manipulations that Paul is talking about right now and calling them photographs, when actually they are photo manipulations. And a photograph, as I was saying, is something that's mostly done in camera, and all the intent is there. And that's why I'm saying 80% of it is really done like maybe in post-production. Ideally, none of it will be done in post-production, but we're not all perfect that way.
right. Also, like, kind of like a segue, right? Look at all the shot on iPhone stuff that you see. Okay, the image capturing device might have been an iPhone, but you're not seeing the $50,000 to $100,000 of custom built equipment they're using in front of the iPhone, right? And then you're also not taking into account the amount of editing and retouching involved.
Yes. So
You
to
have
summarize,
you have to actually show the original image.
yeah. So to summarize with that, I mean, it's all about intention. And it's all about not lying to the public about this. Because if we keep running with what we're doing right now, we're going to completely just start saying, oh, yeah, these are photos and they're not photo manipulations, and you don't really need a camera these days for photos. And I don't think that's responsible at all.
No, because eventually you're going to get to the point where people are just going to use their phones, and their phone's going to do all the calculations or whatever for them. Oh, here's the image. But then they don't know how to actually capture that if they were handed a camera.
Yeah. Plus, I'm afraid that it will eventually start to seep into like the photojournalism world or something like that. It already has started to, in the form of awards and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brett, final thoughts, since me and Paul were most of the ones talking.
For me, I just want to push out honesty more than anything. We're talking about ethics a lot tonight, and I think as photographers, we have a responsibility to be completely truthful and upfront about what we're doing, how we're creating, and why we're creating what we are, and how we're doing it. I've seen so many pictures that some of my photographer friends have produced who have said they're photographs and they're not, and I just wish people would just be more honest about the fact.
I think it's also something that's really big in the landscape photography world as well too, because they really embrace a lot of post-production, and I understand why. But sometimes, like, even when I go to Reddit and I look at like cozy places or like travel subreddit or something like that, you see things and they're not at all what you would see in person. And I think that, again, that sort of really throws people off.
Yeah, I think what there needs to be is a separation between post-production and retouching or manipulating. You could certainly argue that they're part and parcel of the post-production process, but I think there needs to be more of a separation where post-production is purely you're processing the file. That's it. Anything that fundamentally augments the photo in a destructive way should be considered retouching or manipulation.
So an example of that latter would be like replacing the
like sky replacements, or let's say if I'm changing the color of someone's lipstick or removing blemishes in their skin, those would be obvious. Those would be like retouching / manipulating the image.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that for like beach photos, like trying to match the sky and someone's clothing to be the same color. Yeah.
I mean, also, the thing with that too is that's something that if you know how to do it, you could actually do that in post-production. it's not that challenging to do if you actually know how to use Capture One or Lightroom. Like you could do that in post. Um, the problem is just people are so reliant on just arriving at an image that they want in post, not thinking that does it look natural. Part of that is because most people are just looking at images on a device that's this big, right? So like they're just scrolling, and they see the image for like 2 seconds. Oh, it's fine, it's great, cool, awesome, double tap. But like it doesn't stand up to close scrutiny. Like you look at it for more than a second and things start popping out of you. Like that old machine you see at the bar. Like, oh, look at this image. Like, name the 5 things that are wrong. And like you could sit there. I'm like, okay, like that's not like masked out properly. That doesn't look right. The lighting doesn't match with the background. These are things that as photographers, like we need to be cognizant of these things because that's how, like, why does an image not look right? Because you've manipulated to the way that it does not obey the laws of nature. That's why these images are like, they look quote unquote bad. Like you may not know what's wrong with it, except the fact that it looks wrong. This is why.
But Paul, I naturally see people with a ton of clarity and with halos around them. So like, that's just the way that I see things. Are you saying other people don't see things that way?
There are photographers that I respect tremendously that have a bad habit of doing that. I will not name names. But yeah, don't do that.
It's really a shame that some editing software is making this so accessible and making it normal. And thinking about like Luminar 4 and how it's really trying to push this to the forefront for people to try and normalize manipulating your photos so much.
Well, it's not even just them, right? Luminar, it's
well, a lot of it's them. Let's be honest.
Well, yes, but that's almost more closer to the professional side of things. You have apps that will do a lot of these things for you. Just clicking a couple of things, like clicking a couple of settings on your phone, and it will do it. Obviously, it's going to be even worse. The results are going to look like dog poo, but it's a culture thing, right? People, like, you're normalizing the manipulation of reality, and ultimately it's bad on so many levels.
Yeah. All right, let's
get off that soapbox and move on.
I was about to say, yeah, we spent 35 minutes on that. I had a feeling we would go on and on for that, but it's cool. We had to address a couple things, so yeah. Sure. Brett, which segment do you want to do next? Do you want to do RAW versus JPEG or street photography ethics?
Well, I think that previous section leads right into RAW versus JPEG, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there for so long that, and we're talking about cultures in photography as well, and I think there's been such a huge toxic culture that's been built up around RAW versus JPEG. And I think it's something that we need to address in the industry. There's so many people out there who believe that you're not a real photographer unless you shoot RAW. And I know so many of my photographer friends who believe this as well, and they try to discredit those who shoot JPEGs because, you're not a pro unless you're shooting in RAW, and it's just completely ridiculous. And I know it's something you feel strongly about as well, Chris. And for me, I was shooting RAW for many, many, many years because I thought that's what I had to do. That was the standards that a professional photographer had to take, was to shoot RAW. And as my career progressed from being an enthusiast into a professional photographer, I lost the fun aspect of photography for me because I always dread coming home and editing my RAW files. And I've recently found the joy of shooting JPEGs, just because it allows me to go out and shoot without having to worry about coming home and spending hours editing photos.
So with Olympus, because I know you shoot mostly with the Olympus system, you're mostly, are you embracing their art filters at all? Because I love those things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many great ones in there. I know we talk about Fujifilm a lot in their film simulations, but there are a lot of great filters in Olympus cameras. And I'll be honest, when I first switched to Olympus, I didn't. I was still shooting RAW, but what I find now is I will go out and I will shoot raw and JPEG to either card, but I will, instead of gravitating towards picking out my raw card, I will just go through straight to my JPEG card now, and we'll go through those images. And if I see something that needs to be fixed, then I can go to that raw image and change it.
You know, there's also something else about that culture, you know, that we have to shoot like a pro. But in all honesty, like most people that shoot and are in photography, they're more passionate photographers. They're not pros at all. They're just trying to moonlight like one. And I don't think that we should be like embracing that culture anymore. I think it's perfectly okay to be a hobbyist. I mean, if you're a semi-professional who makes a little bit of income, taxable income off of your photography, cool. If most of your income comes off your photography, cool. But I don't think that we should necessarily sit there and just like poo-poo on the hobbyist photographer. We feature a lot of them, and they're fantastic, and they're passionate, and you know, sometimes they're sharing stories about like why they shoot. Like the other day on our Flipboard storyboards, I shared a storyboard about photographers that shoot to help them process mental issues like depression or something like that. And they're producing fantastic work. They're hobbyists. But, you know, like, as I always say, and, you know, as other people always say, the cream rises to the top. You don't necessarily have to be a professional to be part of that cream. You can actually just be a really impassioned enthusiast. And I think, you know, really photography, it really has to do with emotions. And I feel a lot of people sometimes like they lose that and they just try to do something that's very cookie cutter. I've been talking for a while. I mean, Brett, Paul, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's absolutely a great point, you know, and this goes back to the segment we were talking about before, is when you go out and shoot JPEG, you have to know as a photographer how to expose. You have to know how to compose an image. You know, and just being able to go out and get it right in camera and shoot JPEG, if you can create fantastic images with JPEGs, which a lot of people do, fantastic. Means you don't have to spend a lot of time or hours in post manipulating your photos to get them to look like you wanted them to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And that's not something that I've actually started doing more and more. It's shooting RAW and JPEG, especially like right now, you know, I'm reviewing the X-T4, and that's one of the things I've always loved about Fuji cameras is the ability to process in camera, where, you know, I can either shoot with a particular film simulation, or after I've captured an image, I can then apply a certain film simulation to it, or in Brett's case on Olympus, apply an art filter. And a lot of times that's the image that I want. You know, that's all I need. You know, I may have to do some cropping or like horizon adjustments or something. But other than that, you know, that's an image that's ready for press, right? That's all the work I need to do to it. And that's so important for us in knowing how to properly expose for the image. That's also why lighting is so important, because that allows us, that's another thing that we don't have to fix in post. You know, you've got guys that have been shooting forever, and back then, sure, they were still editing, but before raw files was a thing, you had TIFFs, and the only editing that you had was all destructive. So if you didn't get it right for the first place, you're pretty much boned unless you're going to spend hours and hours and hours in Photoshop. And, you know, for what we do sometimes, we have to shoot in JPEG because we can't afford that extra half hour or even less of processing the image and then pushing it out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's say if we're at a product launch and, you know, we're there as it's being broadcast to the world, we have to get content out as soon as possible. And, you know, that requires that we shoot JPEGs. And also, like, sometimes we don't have the raw camera profiles for it. That's the only thing we can rely on is the JPEGs, right? And with respect to what we do for the site when we review, that's something that we always do. It's even if there is a raw profile, for Capture One, we still shoot raw JPEG because your camera will apply certain changes to the JPEGs. You could look and compare the same shot. Look at the raw file, and then you look at the JPEG that your camera has rendered, and you sometimes you will see that maybe there's been vignetting control that's been applied, or there's been perspective control that's been applied in camera, and you won't like this is stuff that you're not going to see if you're just looking at the raw file and the particular lens or camera you're using isn't supported yet officially. So that's another important fact. So if you're shooting with a lens that has a lot of distortion and you're wondering like why does it look all weird, maybe it's because it's probably not supported yet and you have to rely on the JPEG to see what it's actually doing. So yeah, so that's all I have to add.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to say that, there definitely are benefits to shooting raw. I mean, if
I look at raw files as more of a creative tool than a necessity. If I'm shooting, let's say I'm shooting with the intention to create a certain final image, right? And I know that there are elements that I need to manipulate to get that image. Like, let's say I want every shade in an image to match. Let's say I'm creating like an editorial for a fashion brand or a cosmetics brand where everything has to be color coordinated, where like I want all the shades of red or all the shades of blue to match perfectly. Then that's where a raw file gives me that latitude because I can pull information that's recorded with that raw file, and that will allow me to arrive at the final image. But that's another thing too that requires knowledge. If you don't know, you're not going to be able to get the most out of your raw files. So I think the industry should shift the conversation from raw or from like always shooting raw over JPEG to like knowing when to shoot one over the other.
Well, I mean, you can always shoot both. Let's be honest.
Yes,
but,
and we do that.
That's exactly what
but
I do too.
like the one downside is storage.
Well, yeah. It's just, I mean, I feel like, there is that culture that both of you are saying that is all about like, oh, well, you have to just go and process the image and you have to go through this whole editing scheme and stuff like that. And I don't really think that's the way at all. Like when I've been really trying to do this like myself personally. Like when I shoot for myself, like hobbyist shooting, I don't want to sit there and edit all those raws. I just want to sit there and just look at the images. I look at them back in the LCD and I'm like, hey, I like this. So I'll share it immediately to my phone and then I'll throw it on social media and that'll be it. But I don't want to sit there and like spend a night just like really getting into it. Like there are nights where I find it sometimes very cathartic to sit there and just edit backlogs of images and reteach myself something or teach myself something new. But, for my own pleasure shooting, I don't want to feel like I always have to go through that grind, like I think life has more than enough grinds and we don't.
Yeah, I agree. And this kind of segues into the whole ethics thing as well. A lot of it boils down to what your intentions are, right? What are you shooting this for? If you're just purely documenting, why are you even editing?
Absolutely.
The whole act of documenting is to record what's happening. There should be no manipulation whatsoever if you're purely documenting, right? And that's a huge point of contention right now for photojournalism is, should we blur out people's faces or blur out any identifiable features? And from a photojournalistic standpoint, you don't alter anything, but from an ethical standpoint, maybe, these are things that you have to take into consideration because we live in a world that's constantly changing, and ethics is something that has been developed, and it's also something that's fluid. It adapts to the changing landscape that we're in. So before we jump too much into that, I want to Brett, do you want to wrap up the JPEG versus RAW conversation?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, what I would really encourage anyone to do is if you're a photographer who shoots nothing but RAW, just go out and put your camera into JPEG, go and shoot some JPEGs, have fun with it. Because I'll tell you, one of the things I was having trouble with is I was going out shooting for myself as a hobbyist, and I wasn't taking pictures because I wanted to take them. I was only looking for those banger shots that I knew would be great, you know. But I recently reviewed the XT200 and I shot nothing but JPEG. And it was so liberating to know that I could shoot as many pictures as I wanted and I wouldn't have to spend 5 days editing pictures after the fact, you know?
You know, I really wanted to do that with the RX 100. And there came to a point where I was like wrapping up my review and I was like, why the hell did I even shoot this thing in RAW? Like, there's no point for certain cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
like, I don't know, like, I know a couple of years ago, there was this whole movement of Canon photographers that were like, oh yeah, I'm just going to shoot with a Rebel, and that's really going to be everything. But, like, most people that bought a Rebel probably didn't shoot in RAW. Like, they shot in JPEG. They were lazy. Not really lazy, but, like, they didn't want to sit there post-processing. They just wanted nicer photos, you know?
Right. Well, no, yeah, again, it's intention, right? Like, if someone's going out shooting with like a GR3, they're probably not spending hours in post. But if you're shooting with a GFX 100, you're probably spending quite a lot of time in post. Because it's also like what kind of photographer shoots with what. If you're just a street shooter and you're just documenting, you're not really. The only real thing you're doing in post is your culling. You know, that's about it. And you may be doing some cropping, you know, but other than that, you're really not doing much. But if you're shooting like fine artwork, then yeah, you're gonna be at your desk for a bit. Just that's the nature of the beast.
I think there's an exception to that rule, though. A couple of years ago, I saw a photo of a young Justin Bieber with a 1DX, not knowing what he was doing, just shooting with it in RAW. No, in auto, and just shooting JPEGs. You know, like he just decided to buy a camera like that, and just like, yeah, I'll just do it.
You know what? If you've got the money and you want to buy the camera, like it or not, most of this industry is funded by people that just want to buy a camera.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no shame in the game. You know, hey, we welcome you to the world of photography.
Yeah, I mean, these days, like, I'm still even shooting from the idea of a hobbyist because I go into all of these forums, like the Sony forums and the not forums, I'm sorry, Facebook groups, and I'm just seeing like all these guys posting these images that are supposed to be like really great banger shots, like the ones that Brett is talking about. But in truth, like they're probably like, I don't know, some guy that works in a financial district or a cook or something else like that, you know, like they're doing it as a hobby. So
Well, yeah, I mean, you have a lot of these guys that they have, you know, they have disposable income. So some of them buy cars, some of them go clubbing, some of them spend it on expensive camera gear, you know. So I mean, they keep the industry going, and then that fuels development, and then we do what we do. So you know, there's no right or wrong. Like just if you know the fact that you're shooting is good because you're actively participating in the art that is photography.
yeah.
And that's all that matters.
Yeah. Where I personally draw the line, though, is if you're one of those guys like you're talking about where, you know, you get those expensive cars and you roll into the club with it and you try to record yourself with the really expensive camera while you're doing all that. And that's just where I draw the line.
Well, those are usually the guys that crash the cars driving out of the dealership.
I was going to say that, or like they're trying to really mess around.
I mean, you know, like it's kind of like it's all related. Like, you know, if you're gonna buy an expensive camera, you should probably spend and allocate some money towards learning how to use it. You know, like I teach private seminars to people that want to learn how to shoot. So, you know, like that's great. And, you know, maybe people that buy expensive cars should take driving lessons. Just because you can start a car doesn't mean you know how to handle a car that tops out at, you know, 200 miles per hour and red lines at 9,000 RPM.
God, that's so true, especially when driving around New York. It's like, why do you have this car on our streets? Like, come on, man.
Yeah, you see a Lamborghini and they're doing like 15 miles per hour, and on Fifth Avenue, and it's full of potholes. Yeah, that's like every time it hits a pothole, that's 20 grand.
Hey, Brett, tell us about the Ferrari that's in your garage, man.
Oh, you weren't supposed to say that. My wife's on here.
Oh,
She doesn't know about it
man.
yet.
I'm fired. I guess that leaves us with our final segment. Paul, you're the one taking lead on that. It's about ethics and street photography.
Yeah, so the topic of ethics came up this week, and just for the purpose of this episode, we're going to focus on ethics with relations to street photography. So depending on where in the world you live, obviously the local regulations are different. But here in the U.S., if you are in a public place, legally you're allowed to photograph anyone that's also in the public place, because by being in the public, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy because we're all out in the public. And
Actually, it goes a little bit beyond that. So, like, let's say if someone's in a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows, you're allowed to photograph into their home because you
right. So that's where the issue of what's legal versus what's ethical comes into play. Now, while yes, legally you're certainly allowed to do so, but at what point are you breaching the line of ethics in doing that? Now, there've been the name of the photographer, I can't think of the name right away, but they did a series recently where the entire series was him kind of shooting. I believe it might have been called Hidden Lives. That was the name of the series, where the entire photo series was him shooting other people in their homes, and you're just seeing an apartment window basically.
So he's outside shooting into their homes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they were from like other buildings shooting through. I don't remember exactly, but that's where kind of like, is it legal and or is it ethical to do so? Because a lot of it kind of borders on voyeurism, right? And which obviously, when you bring up voyeurism, it tends to have a negative connotation to it.
Well, it is a pretty negative connotation. I mean, like,
yeah. So, and it also gives photographers a bit of a bad name because, there's that association where it's just guys with a camera, and they happen to be creepy guys on the camera shooting into people's homes or into private spaces. So just because something is legal doesn't mean you should do it, because ethically it's wrong. Now, what do you guys think? Like, because, even in street photography, you see a lot where people are getting up into people's faces and just sticking a camera and snapping a shot. There's some photographers that are known for this, and they're quite aggressive about it. So, what do you think, Chris and Brett?
Brett, I'll let you go first because I can go on for forever about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, shooting into someone's home is ethically wrong, I would think, personally, for me. Now, if they were outside their home, I wouldn't have a problem with it. It's funny, actually, because, again, going back to my XT200 review, I was out shooting pictures of just random people, and my daughter actually said to me, "Hey, you can't take their picture." I'm like, "Well, why not? Why do you believe that?" And she's like, "Well, it's just not right." So we had to have a big conversation about, hey, the expectation is you're in a public place and you're going to be captured in pictures. And that's just how it is. And I think that's fine. That's totally acceptable. But yeah, it's a very, very thin line between being acceptable and not acceptable. And I think, I don't know, it's just such a gray area for me. I don't know. It's a tough one. It really is.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of self-policing in the industry that that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I was going to get into that.
Yeah, so for example, like Chris and I, we were covering some of the Black Lives Matter protests earlier today around New York City. And personally, obviously there were a lot of people. It was out in public. But anytime that I was photographing, like if I was photographing someone that was standing by themselves, and I was making like eye contact with them before I even photographed them and had my camera up. I was like, "Hey, is it okay if I took a picture of you?" And yeah, everyone nodded. They said, "Yeah, sure, it's fine." And they held up their sign. So I think part of that is, as street photographers, we need to be upfront about our intentions so that they're not misconstrued. They're not misunderstood, and thus perpetuating this culture of the creepy guy with a camera. Because there certainly are those, and we see them all the time. You've got guys walking around with a camera, like snapping photos of people up their skirts, or they're just taking photos of people sunbathing in the park, or even at, like just trade shows, for example. For a long time, there's this
Oh, geez, I know.
there's this
exactly what
thing
you're
where
talking
you
about.
have, yeah, exactly where I'm going with this. Camera manufacturers would have attractive women, quote unquote, booth babes. Like, I hate using that term, but for the longest time, that's what they were referred to as. They were dressed usually in a seductive outfit, and you would have guys that just, they're standing like, all the way back, like with a 200 or like a 400 lens, and just snapping away. And that is obviously creepy. Is it legal? Sure. Ethical? No, because like that is like that's just creepy behavior. Like,
And it's
sure,
crazy
there's
too, because I mean, if you ask some of those women, they'd be like, "Well, I'm getting paid, so I don't really care," and it
right, but
doesn't
that's
make it
part
any
of
better.
that's part of the culture, right? It's
Yeah,
like that's like that's not what we're about. You know,
That's a big problem with things like Comic Con as well.
oh,
I
don't
know
get me
jeez.
I
started.
know people who would go to Comic Con just for that reason, and I'm like, dude, come
Yeah,
on, that
and
is not cool.
yeah, speaking as someone that used to photograph Comic Con, like I was paid to go and photograph people there. Uh, and then you would have all these creepy guys that like they would shoot over my shoulders. And then I'm working with a client, and then they get distracted. I'm like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then I've got this schmuck behind me with, with a bridge camera or with like a T5i or something with a kid zoom, and it's
Oh,
shooting
dude,
over
that's
my.
when I got in their face. Like
No,
when I used to
that's
do
when
that.
like so I like at first I would just tell, "Hey, that's not cool, man. Like if you want to photograph them, ask them for permission first. They're human beings. Engage with them in a conversation. Ask them if it's okay." Like you guys can go back on the site. I wrote a huge long piece about this maybe 2 years ago. If you want to photograph people, that's perfectly fine, but don't be intrusive. Don't be interruptive. And then these people sometimes, "Oh, they're just whatever. I'm just taking a photo." I'm like, I understand you're taking photos, so am I, but you're being blatantly, disruptive.
Before
That's
we
not cool.
veer off topic a little bit too much, let me reel us back a little bit. This is
Mhm.
about ethics,
Yeah.
and there's a lot that you guys were saying that I was letting you talk about that I really want to tackle right now.
Mhm.
Voyeurism. Let's start
Yeah.
with that. This is a clear example of voyeurism. So let's define voyeurism here. Voyeurism here is you taking a photo of someone else for your own self-pleasuring reasons. That can be a number of things. It can be emotional reasons. It can be sexualized reasons. It can be a number of things. And when you're doing that, it's very malicious because you're using that person and there isn't two ways of consent. And that is incredibly wrong. And that was one of the big reasons that happened years ago when like people were so afraid of street photographers taking photos of their kids in public. And it just happened where men were the ones that were more marginalized about it. But I knew a lot of women that were also doing it as well too. And the women would say that I'd be able to get away with it because I was a woman.
Yeah.
And it's not right either way. Like if you're gonna photo, first off, I would recommend any photographer to not really photograph kids.
Yeah, totally agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I'm teaching people, I'm like, "Oh, is it okay?" I'm like, legally, yes, but like, why are you even photographing the children to begin with?
Yeah, and I think that comes again with your intent. You
Mhm.
have to have good intentions. If you're photographing a really intimate moment between a mom and their daughter or their son, and you really want to capture that, then I guess that's okay. But afterwards, I'd be like, I'd go up to the mom. I'd be like, hey, I caught this really nice photo of you and your son. I'd like to send it to you.
Mhm.
Or is it okay if I keep it?
Right.
And they're going to ask you, well, why'd you take it? And that's where I think you should be upfront. Be like, I'm just a hobbyist photographer. I sometimes shoot for Instagram, or I sometimes just do this. Be upfront with your intentions, but
Yeah.
also know your place and know what you do. When you go to, and this is me going into the other segment, when you go to those protests, Paul, you and I went because we have jobs.
Mhm.
Our job actually really requires us to go out there and test these cameras because other people will do it, whether they're journalists or they're hobbyists or something like that. But if
Right.
you're going there and you're just trying to do documentary porn of everything that's going on when people are quite literally dying, and you just want to show it off to your 75 followers on Instagram, then you're not helping the cause.
Absolutely not.
You're absolutely not. If you are taking those photos and you're creating them and you're putting them into a cohesive series and you're trying to shop that around to, say, the New York Times or Petapixel or Us or F-Stoppers or Photo Focus or something else like that because you're genuinely trying to spread a message, then cool. But otherwise, like, you just shooting for yourself, like, I mean, you're a hobbyist, that's fine, but there are ethical limitations there.
Mhm.
And that goes now into the deeper thing of shooting into someone's home. If you're in public and you're shooting into someone's home, or there was a big issue about this. I think, God, we're in 2020 now. 2014, where here in New York, we have this place called the High Line. It's a subway that was above ground, and they reformatted it into a park. And there's this giant, like, beautiful penthouse hotel there called the Standard, and people were just having sex in the windows because they felt like it. And everyone would just stop and they'd look up and they'd take photos. And the people that were having sex in the windows were like, oh, you really shouldn't be taking photos of us. And everyone else in public being like, oh, well, you really shouldn't just be having sex near the windows. And, that's one, I'd sit there and I'd be like, don't do that near the windows. You're kind of moronic to do that.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you're like, if you're an exhibitionist and that's your thing, go ahead. But then don't be surprised if someone out in the public sees it and captures it.
Yes, and that's where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
When it comes to photographing into other people's private homes, though, I think that if you're trying to show and build evidence against, like, let's say, and I'm saying this because I read the subreddit Crazy Parents a lot, where you see constant abuse of parents abusing their child, and you're trying to find a way to document this and make a case against it and trying to save that child, then cool. But check your own intentions about that. If you're photographing into a home because you really like the look of someone else, put the camera down, don't ever pick it back up again. That's not cool at all. You are doing that again for very self-pleasuring reasons. And you can do that without hurting people. Also, again, there's no two ways of consent. And I think that's incredibly important. Yeah, I think that's me tackling almost all of those issues. Comic-Con was one. I know that.
Another big one for me is people who will go out and deliberately photograph the homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
As well.
Oh man,
That's another
I
huge
cannot
ethical
stand
issue.
poverty porn.
Yep, I know, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's something that I've done it when I was starting out with photography, because like there was like it's a juxtaposition. This is a story I want to tell. Okay, great. But then it goes deeper because you have to think: am I contributing anything useful to this conversation, or am I just, hey, look, here's a person of unfortunate circumstance. We need to check our intentions. Like, why are we shooting this to begin with?
I think where it's okay, and I've only just become reluctant to this, is, when you're showing off really big amounts of economic disparity. Like, if there's someone begging on the street and there's other people in that scene that are dressed very well, and you can clearly tell they're doing very well, and they don't really care to help the poor at all,
Mhm.
then doing something that's sort of like a social landscape shot like that, I think would be okay if you turn it into a series and
Mhm.
you consistently show that there is a problem with economic disparity.
Right. But you're doing this with the intention of telling a story.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
But
storytelling.
you like the problem here is, like I'm not recommending you do this, but look on the street photography hashtag, and you're gonna come across a lot of quote unquote documentary porn or poverty porn where it's just okay, here's a photo of someone on the street, usually poorly composed. Um,
We had a lot of that in our recent street photography contest.
yeah, and we get pitched all the time with people. Oh, I just shot this series. Now all I see is okay. You've shown me 20 photos of people that's fallen in hard times. What's the story here? You're contributing nothing unique and new to the conversation. Like, are you trying to help these people? If so, what's the message? Because there is no message other than you're just showing, okay, here's just a bunch of people that are on the streets. If you're going to do that, have a message, and hopefully that message is going to end up contributing to helping these people out.
Yeah.
Don't
But then
use it
that's
as,
a slow burn, you know?
yeah, don't use it for personal gain. Oh, look at me, like look at me documenting the streets. Like I'm sorry, you're not the next Robert Frank. You're not, like sorry, you're not. It's been done.
Yeah.
It's
I
old,
think
it's tired, and you're not helping these people in the least.
I think we got to understand just how powerful a tool a camera is. I mean,
Oh,
you can
man.
definitely use a camera for good. You
Mhm.
can definitely use it for malice and evil as well. You just need to,
Yeah.
you got to understand just how powerful it is to go out and capture images and the impact it can have on people.
Yeah, and I can't stand I've been invited to oh, there's a gallery opening, and this person, it's like the entire show is just people on the streets. Okay, so and this person is selling prints. So I'm like,
Dude,
okay,
I got invited to one of these
yeah, I'm
recently.
like, my dude, my guy, are you donating to a cause? Are you donating to a soup kitchen? Are you donating to homeless shelters? Like, are you affecting positive change? Or are you just benefiting off of the downtrodden that already have nothing and you're just trying to make money off of their backs? Like,
Yeah,
that
that's
is
not
not
cool.
cool. That is not ethical. I do not condone it. And shame on you for doing it.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that you brought up very quickly that we didn't address, going up to people in the streets with a flash and just photographing them.
Bruce Gilden.
I'm all right with it. I'm completely all right with it because he's not harassing people. He's not harming people in any way. And he's not putting them in a situation where they're in danger. If he's putting someone in a situation where, like, let's say a bike is coming at you and he flashes the bike and the bike veers off and that person dies, then fine. I completely understand where you're coming from.
Part of that, it's kind of the argument with like paparazzi, right? And I asked this.
I'm a former
I
paparazzi.
know. I asked this knowing that you used to be a former paparazzo. So where does, because usually paparazzi gets a bad rep, and because a lot of them, like, let's face it, there's a good amount of them that are jerks, but not all of them are jerks. So what do you think?
About paparazziism?
No, yeah, like, what do you guys think?
I think, Brett, if you want to go first, you can, but otherwise, I can speak from experience.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear the experience.
That is the most corrupt part of this industry that I've ever seen. So first off, let's say Kim Kardashian is going somewhere, or better yet, theory, crazy conspiracy theory. Kanye West has been at airports many times, and there are photographers that have gotten up to him and photographed him, and he's physically beaten them down. There are times where agents will let entire photo wires, news agencies, and photo agencies know where their clients are going to be at what time. Then those editors tell all of the photographers within their crew where that person will be, and those photographers are then competing against one another for exclusive images. And that's usually the only way that you can make money. But it starts from the top where their agents are selling these people out. And if you're in public, again, I think it's okay. But if you're sneaking into their homes and trying to get an image that way, I'm not okay with that. I never really have been okay with that at all. Back to Kanye West, I think that he purposely was set up. No, I think he purposely said to the photographer, hey, take a couple of punches from me. Here's $120,000. We just need this to make me look a little bit better and to be in the news. And, you know, what's $120,000 to Kanye West? Nothing. But it made headlines everywhere. Similar things happened with Justin Bieber and a bunch of other photographers.
Well, even going back further, like, look at Princess Diana. Like,
that was messed up. That was
Yeah.
completely messed up.
but I think it's a culture within that particular industry. Is like you said, you're forcing these photographers into situations where they have to outdo their competition to get the shot, and in doing that, they're doing things that are less than legal and less than ethical, and
Yes.
and oftentimes dangerous. In the case of Princess Diana, fatal.
Yeah, no, I agree with you about that.
Mhm.
I
So-
never did anything like that. But,
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's like it's never all, you know, like, not everyone is bad, but the culture or surrounding that industry fosters this type of behavior.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, like, I don't know what the rates are for those kinds of things, but when you sit there and you think about, like, you know, there's the other part of the culture where when I was doing this, people really loved seeing images of kids. Don't ask me why, but they do. I remember photographing Mariska Hargitay with her daughter on the set of SVU. You know, she took her daughter to a park nearby, and they were playing around, and that was one of my most sold and highest grossing images, just because of the fact that the public just wants to see celebrities with their kids.
Well, that's another form of voyeurism, right? Because these
Yeah,
are
but that's
things
public
that,
voyeurism. That's feeding into something else.
yeah,
You know,
because
that's not.
that's a part of these people's lives that or intentionally we're not privy to, and nor should we be entitled to that, because these are their families, and it's their choice what they want to do with it. You know, and I think a lot of people in the public realm now are cognizant of the fact that, hey, like, I can't make these decisions for my children who are underage, even though, like, I'm their legal guardian. Like, it's not right to put them into the public eye when they have no control over that. So that leads to like most celebrities, they don't show their kids at all, and that's the prerogative, right? But then that's why, anytime that photos of them surface, people go nuts over it, because, like, oh my god, like, this is the first time I'm seeing it. I'm like you have to ask yourself, like, why do you get
Personally, I don't
so-
care to see your kids. I'm sorry.
I really don't. Like, it doesn't matter to me, but, like, some people, like why are these magazines so popular? Like, some people get off on seeing things that they're not supposed to see. So what does that say about you?
I think a lot of people feel that public figures owe them something for some reason as well. You know, it's such a weird
Yeah,
situation.
it's a weird power dynamic. Oh, well, you're in the public, so, like, like, you should do this and this, and I'm like, they're human beings just like us.
Hold
They don't-
up, back up on that. What do you mean specifically that you feel like they owe them something?
Almost, I think a lot of the mentality is you wouldn't be where you are without us supporting you. So we should be able to see you in every aspect of your personal life.
You can pay for my OnlyFans or my Patreon then in that case. Like,
But I do
jeez.
think a lot of people do actually feel that that's their right to be able to get inside these people's personal lives, because they believe they wouldn't be there without the support the fans give them.
Well, so bringing this back to photography, right? So not just us now. Like, everyone's got a phone in their pockets, and with respect to celebrities, what is the first thing that you see? Like if someone remotely famous shows up in public, everyone takes their phones out and they start snapping away.
Yeah, they do something like this with their iPads usually. Like that.
Exactly.
Exactly.
They feel like they have the right to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Which, if you're in the public, it's legal, yes, but it's not ethical if you're doing it disruptively. Also, like, don't forget these people are human beings, right? So, like, I've been fortunate in that I've had genuine conversations with some of these celebrities where the thought never even came up that, like, to take like a selfie or whatever. And at the end, it was, oh, so what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a photographer. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm surprised you didn't ask to take a photo. I'm like, well, no, like, we're just talking, and it was genuinely nice to get to know you. And then they would, oh, well, if you want to grab a selfie together, over, and then yes, because they made it okay. And I'm not a big selfie person anyway, so I'm like, cool.
You're funny. I'd still say no, and I have done it before. I'm like, no, I'm good, man.
Yeah, but the problem with it is we live in a culture where we feel we're entitled to it. Like the moment a celebrity shows up, people run up and they just start snapping selfies with the person. You want to like ask for consent first, like because you come off like an a-hole. Like you like who does that? What normal human being does that to other human beings? Like if I saw a random person, I'm not gonna run up and just start taking selfies with them. This is like a phenomenon that only happens with people in the public eye. Like,
So
we forget to treat them as human beings.
There's no respect there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a kind of funny story about that. A couple of years ago when I was shooting, forgot what event it was. I think it was probably a previous polar bear plunge or something like that. I was talking with another photographer, and there was this other guy that was right next to us listening to our conversation, eavesdropping. And we're talking, me and the photographer, I think it was, geez, I forgot what his name is right now. But we were talking about business, right? A lot of big things in the business. And when the guy was eavesdropping, he was like, hey, can I take a photo of you guys? I don't know who you are, but like you seem really famous. And I was like, dude, he legit said that to us. I'm like, no, man, like
just
if you don't know who I
case.
am,
Yeah,
if
just
you
on
don't
the
know,
off case, right?
yeah, I'm like, if you don't know who I am, like I don't want to know who you are. I don't want to take a photo of you. Like how is that okay? And the other photographer was like, I'll take a photo with you, and I'm all right with that. I'm like, no, hell no, get out of my face. I'm trying to work.
Yeah, we've encountered this, but not this instance you referred to. But like, we would be talking about the industry, and then some guy was like, "Oh, you guys sound like you guys sound like you're big, like really important, or like whatever." Like, and then they would start talking industry stuff. I'm like, and we look at each other. I'm like, wait, what's happening? But like people have this for whatever reason. They think that just because this person is now worth something, I need to get a piece of this, and we need to reframe whatever this phenomenon is because it's weird and it's wrong.
I think the phenomenon is social media and people knowing they can get images that are going to get them likes on social media.
So clout thirst.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but what really is a like? Like, I'm not going to sit there on my deathbed and be like, I really wish I did something to get those 1,000 likes on Instagram.
Exactly. It's not important, but people have put such a huge value on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
One like, one prayer, man. One life save.
Yeah. Don't give your worth and your value away so easily. Whether or not someone likes your work or double taps on your image does not make it a good or bad image. Don't shoot completely off topic, but like don't shoot for likes. Shoot with the intention to create. Shoot what fuels your creativity. If people like it, great. If not, well, maybe your audience hasn't found you yet.
And more importantly, to that point, shoot. Don't sit there and try to composite all the time and then say, oh, yeah, I captured this image. No, that's a lie. Like, be upfront with your intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Anyways, I think we've exhausted.
Yeah, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes.
That's what we full circle. That was pretty good.
Yeah, we can go on for forever about this, but we don't have to. This is a long enough video. Thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Tune in every Sunday. We are here every night at 7 p.m. Every Sunday night, rather, at 7 p.m. And yeah, go ahead and visit us on thefootballographer.com, and we'd love to hear more from you guys about the discussion that we had here. I'm going to cut the recording here. Thanks a lot, folks. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, folks.